You're joined by producer Cam Smith. Lots to talk about today. As always, we do it every weekday here on Fancred. And we got some interesting stuff coming up later on in the show. You may or may not have heard about this, but apparently, thanks to Andrew Marchand of the New York Post, esteemed media reporter, sports media columnist for the New York Post, and you probably already know who he is. He's reporting that Antonio Brown, who needs no introduction, is in talks to box against a guy named Logan Paul, who apparently you probably know who he is, and I guess I should know who he is, and I do know his name, but he is a YouTube influencer personality, and he has been boxing now, even though he's not a boxer. And most recently had a fight on DAZN, that boxing streaming service that we've talked about a lot. And apparently it did a lot of numbers. DAZN, let's face it, DAZN is desperate to try to get subscribers, maintain subscribers, build an audience. And so now Antonio Brown is in talks with this Logan Paul guy in the context of DAZN, which is on the heels of something that really seems like it's way overdue, but apparently not. Drew Rosenhaus, esteemed longtime agent in the NFL, former agent of Terrell Owens, but too many players to name right now. In fact, on the Patriots as well, has multiple players that he represents on the Patriots, that he has now terminated his relationship with Antonio Brown because he's concerned about Brown's mental health. And if Brown goes and gets, help for what is apparently now, we're told, a mental condition, some sort of problem that I guess it's just cropping up now out of nowhere. We just got it because of the behavior that was on camera in his confrontation with police recently, and his girlfriend and his 3 children with his girlfriend. I'm sure us having video of that with him displaying behavior that was strange, weird, to say the least, and I might add, is nothing new. Nothing new. So the fact that it's on video, the fact that it is out there, it's a little bit like OBJ, and we covered that yesterday. Had there not been video of him passing out $100 bills or, giving a love tap on the backside to whether it was a police officer, rent-a-cop, he would not have, had a warrant for his arrest sent out for simple battery, nor would there be a big outrage and public outcry over him passing out those $100 bills to players, which, by the way, I'm all for. It's the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. But had none of that been on video, and I want to point out this $100 bill thing, because we've only talked about that sort of thing, the video, and the reason it came out was because of the video. The fact that there's some sort of warrant that went out for his arrest, that only happened because it was on tape. That's it. It's the only reason. And of course, the police officer had no business being in the locker room in the first place. And so that's what generated the whole problem, in my opinion. But I also want to apply that principle, which I really haven't, to the $100 bill thing, because had it not been on video, had it not been on the broadcast of the game, we wouldn't be talking about it. And if you watch Get Up this morning, and I scan all the shows, canvas everything coming into this show as we prep every day, me and Cam Smith, our producer, I'm watching ESPN personalities, former players, that they're basically saying, yeah, we all got paid when they played college sports, college football. And not exactly a revelation, but so I do want to address that in greater detail, perhaps in a little bit. But so we've got the guy who's out front, not only on that story, but he's also been covering something that we covered with Mike McCarthy, who broke the story about ESPN offering $14 million to Tony Romo recently to be an analyst on Monday Night Football, trying to get him away from CBS. And that could include Jim Nantz. That could also include ESPN trying to get And I should say this is really Disney trying to get the Sunday NFL package, of which is in the possession of CBS and has been for some time. Don't be surprised if Disney is able to horn in on that Sunday package. I think it goes without saying at this point. We'll get Andrew's very well-educated opinion, and I actually, in some ways, defer to him in this situation. But knowing what I know, including information which I can't really mention here because I only have one person telling me that, and if I do, it might connect what I'm telling you to them. But I would be shocked if Disney, I need to stop saying ESPN, Disney, I would be shocked if Disney did not retain Monday Night Football, and I would be surprised if they did not at least get some games that were not on Monday night with the ability to broadcast NFL games in addition to Monday Night Football. I would be very surprised if that didn't happen for Disney and have those games end up on ABC. And if those games end up on ABC, there's a very good chance that perhaps those could be the games that we have been watching on CBS over the years. Now, do I think CBS is going to be pushed out of the NFL broadcasting business? No. And it isn't because CBS should be in the broadcasting business of the NFL, because it probably doesn't have the money to keep doing it. CBS, if you don't know, and I don't think people recognize this. In fact, I know they don't. But in all the network players that we talk about, at least in sports, CBS is kind of the runt of the litter, and it always has been in terms of resources and revenue and the size of the company. It's much smaller than the other companies that have NFL live broadcast rights. That's a fact. And that's why CBS, you look at that network and you say, well, they've got the SEC. Well, first of all, CBS is this legacy network brand that has a reputation to their credit, whether it's deserved or not. 60 Minutes, you have all of these, venerable franchises associated with CBS for obvious reasons. But of course, that's extremely long in the tooth and has been for some time. And now Moonves on CBS was really this dynamic force of nature that was able to keep CBS kind of in the conversation. And now that he's gone, first off, we don't know, and we won't know until things play out in negotiations, whether or not CBS really prioritizes the NFL at this point with the board and management of the parent company. And so we don't know yet, no matter what people are saying. But without Les Moonves, specifically his, outward public profile before Me Too, and more importantly, his relationships with the players who control the broadcast rights of the NFL, the owners, and Roger Goodell, right? Without that, CBS is behind the 8 ball. It's in trouble. And I think ultimately, I'm not saying CBS is going to go away, but I think CBS could at some point really get swallowed up and not represent what it represents today. Just put it that way. And a part of that process will likely be the marginalization of CBS in the context of broadcasting NFL games. And that's going to start when I believe Disney takes some of their games, not all of their games. And I need to get to this point. The NFL has every reason to want CBS as part of, broadcasting NFL games for a lot of different reasons. But the most important reason is they want as many bidders at the table. And that's what this is. That's what that represents with CBS. But when you were talking about the SEC and CBS, because that is another, broadcast situation that CBS is associated with. CBS was paying. It's probably CBS's deal with the SEC is probably the greatest deal in the history of sports when it comes to broadcast rights agreements, because the length of the deal and the timing of it, because the SEC made that deal with CBS, which is still, happening right now, right before the explosion, in college football broadcast rights agreements. And so now CBS has this deal, and I've said it before on this show, in which they pay $55 million for the right to broadcast the entire season of SEC football games. I mean, think about how big the Alabama LSU game was for CBS. I mean, that's an NFL level game, but there were a lot of games. I mean, the LSU Florida game this year, I could go on and on and on. And think about that. And now understand that Disney is paying $120 million per Monday Night Football game, per game on Monday Night Football. So $55 million for the entire season of the SEC football for CBS, $120 million per game for Disney and Monday Night Football. Clearly, it appears that Disney overpaid. But, in a flash, that could change if Amazon or Google or Apple decides to horn in on the situation. And I want to talk to Andrew about this. And, it's tough because we had Trip Mickle on the other day, Wall Street Journal reporter, who is connected to Apple in that he covers Apple for the Journal. But he's also a longtime sports business guy who has written for Sports Business Journal. His name is Trip Mickle, and he now covers Apple for the Wall Street Journal. And he broke the story a few weeks ago, and we had him on, just like we're having Andrew on. This is what we do every day. If you're not coming in here every day, you need to, because nobody else is doing this. And of course, this is all relevant, important information. So when things happen, you'll understand why. But so he's the guy that I think tipped us off to what could be one of the biggest stories in sports, perhaps in the next year or two. And that is Apple getting into the sports business. Regardless of how much Apple, regardless of the cash pile of Apple, the $1 trillion in cash they have sitting there, which you always hear about when you turn on CNBC. They've got a cash pile of $700 billion. Okay, great. Well, what's going on? What are we doing that? What are we doing with that money? Okay, we're going to start Apple TV, and we're going to plus streaming service to go up against Disney Plus and Netflix and Amazon. Oh no, Brooks, they're not competing. Oh, they're not? Well, then why did Bob Iger recuse himself from the Apple board? Because they're competing. And that's why Apple TV Plus, whatever the hell they call it. I mean, they can do whatever they want, I know. And that's why Apple has been reported by Trip Mickle as being in discussions with the Pac-12, discussing their broadcast rights situation. Right now, the Pac-12 truly is at a nadir in the history of the conference in our lifetime as to its influence and, the financial solvency of the entire league. And there's a lot of factors that go into it, including, of course, and probably most notably, the disaster at USC, which I'm going to talk about in 1 second. And we didn't get a chance to get to yesterday, sufficiently at least, what's just happened at USC, which is very significant, very significant. And there's some things I haven't talked about at all in the context of USC that's important. But USC is critical. It's the flagship franchise, if you will. And I do consider all of this to be professional sports. Of course, professional sports where the players don't get paid. Isn't that nice? Sound familiar in American history? So just a coincidence that the vast majority are African Americans. And it's the only industry, company, or situation where that happens in America like this. But that all a coincidence, but when it comes to Apple TV Plus, Apple is in a position that's different, unfamiliar to it in this sports situation, if they're going to enter into sports, and Trip Mickle told us they're looking to. And nothing makes more sense to me if I'm Apple and I want to make a splash, number one, than throwing in with the Pac-12 and bringing all that Pac-12 content over to Apple and doing whatever you can. If I'm Apple, do whatever you can. Remember, they're competing with Disney, ESPN. They're competing with Disney now. Bob Iger, is no longer on the board specifically because Apple launched this streaming service. So if I'm Apple, look, you can overpay for original television productions and series. That's fine. And you'll get, it's evergreen content, and that's good to have, but you're Apple. You can only pay Reese Witherspoon $100 million, so many times to produce a show or a series. You're not going to get the kind of penetration and potential revenue by, not making a big splash, and a splash that people will cause people to subscribe and come back repeatedly over a long period of time. Place you on their calendar, future calendar, their to-do list. And the one thing that could provide Apple that, and the reason that Fox right now has gone all in on live sports during the week, right, is that this is a way to get attention and to drive revenue. And if any company is in a position to disrupt the industry and really place their new shingle that they have, on their business out in the open and get it into the conversation every day around the country, Apple TV Plus, it's Apple. They've got the money to do it. They've got the credibility with the brand to do it, which is why they launched Apple TV Plus in the first place. They've got the user base to do it, because if they were to place a lot of games, big football games from the Pac-12 on Apple TV Plus, I mean, seriously, out here on the West Coast, most people already would have access to those games. And if I'm Apple TV Plus, what I was going to say was, dude, I would do whatever. I would pay whatever I had to pay to get all the Pac-12 games on, as many as possible, right? So if you, and I'm going to talk about SC, this relates to USC. If you think that USC at some point in the near future is not going to be back in the college football playoff discussion on a yearly basis, right? You don't know history. You don't know anything. And you don't know what's going on at USC, right? Here in LA. Because trust me when I tell you, speaking of money, there's no school, university, group of people more committed to a good football team and driving championships for that football team than the donors of USC. And donors, alumni, drive everything at these big schools. They make the hires. They create the stadiums. Look at Baylor. It's alumni, folks. That's what it is. And so USC has as prominent and wealthy a group of donors as any place in the country. Harvard's not in the Power Five with those folks. So when you consider the potential there, this is a distressed asset right now, but it's a distressed asset that inevitably is going to come back. I also expect a school like Washington to come around eventually and maybe get into that discussion. I mean, there's a lot of situations that could play out to the benefit of the Pac-12. So if I'm Apple right now, I'm all over the Pac-12. And you may be saying, dude, it's Apple, okay? What are you talking about? What do they care about football? What do they know about football? Why would they value sports? What's that got to do? What do you mean? They started Apple TV Plus, number one. They're in the media business. And of course, they've got Fox Media. And on your phone, they've got news. I mean, they're in the media business. They're in the content production business, period. Outside of Apple TV Plus. But like Google and like Amazon, more and more, they're in a position because, I mean, this all stems, folks. It all stems from, Cam, I got it, by the way, I got that note from you. This all stems from, just so you know, when you say, why would Apple do this? They're doing it because they've got you. you've got their phone and they've got a captive audience. And you talk about an advantage over Disney, and Netflix. That's the advantage, folks. And while they have that advantage and the cash, right? Why not try to be everything in the media business? Why not? And so, and of course, they're out in Cupertino and the Pac-12 offices in San Francisco. That's not that big of a deal. But so if Apple does that and they're able to spirit away, all of the top games in the Pac-12, right? And they can pay whatever needs to be paid to do that. That's going to be a huge story. And this is something that I think is going to be talked about here in the very near future, because the Pac-12 has to do something, right? They've turned down ESPN over and over and over again, to the point, ESPN wanted to start a network for the Pac-12 in the way that it started the ACC network and the SEC network. And I can promise you, it doesn't want to start a Pac-12 network now. That window is closed. There's no discussion there. That's gone. So you've got a commissioner in Larry Scott who needs money, because the schools are not being fed money in the way the SEC schools are, because of that SEC television network and ACC. And of course, that stems from where? Disney. That's where that money is coming from. So like the Vanderbilt recruiting budget, right? The Vanderbilt recruiting budget is flush, folks, and it's only going to get much, 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 much bigger when ESPN and Disney signs that new broadcast deal for $335 million a year with the SEC, which is coming. So that's around the corner. So if you're Vandy or Texas A&M, you're saying, thank God we moved. And that's why they moved, to get that revenue from Disney. And so now you're Apple, and you grab the Pac-12 and you take over this god-awful Pac-12 network, and you have this captive audience, these users with the phone, right? And so if you start a Pac-12 network, you're not going to be placing fans in a position where I can't get the games, and there's no way you can get the games. It's almost impossible to get the games because they're not cleared on various cable, providers, distributors, and that's not going to change. It's a disaster right now, and you've got a distressed asset in the Pac-12, so people really aren't talking about it. They're not making a big deal out of it. It's a big deal. It will be a big deal when USC comes back, which it will. So I want to address that, but I just want to get you out front on Apple, because the people that are in it's understandable. That's why Trip Mickle is also so important. He's, like when we talk to sports business reporters, just like if you were to talk to me about Apple's business, what the hell do I know? How would I know what's going to happen? Right. Well, when you ask people about what is Apple going to do potentially in bidding for broadcast rights agreements, sports business reporters, now they may have a shot in the dark source and they may be plugged in. I don't know. But I mean, why would they have any intimate knowledge of what's coming or have detailed knowledge? And we haven't seen anything. It's all been kind of a mystery right now. And I think the implication is, from the sports media standpoint, that, well, they're not interested. Google, Apple, Amazon, they're dabbling, but, they've got bigger fish to listen. Broadcasting football games, college football games, and the NFL is as big as it gets in the United States. The NFL and football is, and Cam, I want to know what you think about this. Cam Smith is our producer here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. I want to know what you think about this. Is today, of course, the United States is, because what I'm trying to show you why, while we're being led to believe Amazon, Apple, Google, they're not really interested in sports. It's kind of a side. It's not a sidelight. And I'm going to give you an example of what I mean. So the United States really is defined by the exportation of our way of life. In the history of the world, no country has had their customs and cultures that were originated, for the most part, originated here, adopted around the world in the way that's happened since our country was founded. And of course, it's a very enthusiastic exportation of that culture. Correct? Correct. Right. And let me give you an example that shows you the depth of it. When you watch, the Party Congress in Beijing, and they show you the big great room, and the leader of China is speaking to all of the apparatchiks, members of the Communist Party, and all that stuff. Right now, they're all wearing suits. They're all wearing suits because of the United States and our culture, right? Same thing in Asia, all over Asia, right? When it comes to business and that sort of in public life, for the most part, right? In China, which is supposedly completely separated from us, right? And an adversary. Well, they've adopted a lot of our customs. Now, I'm not saying the British didn't have something to do with that too. They did to a certain extent. But it really happened because America has done more to globalize the world in the age of technology than any country. So the whole point is that there aren't many things that are prominent and really popular in the United States that you won't find all over the world now, right? And they originated here. One of the biggest exceptions, and my point is the biggest exception, is American football. It's funny because whenever you think of something that's huge in the United States, if you're an American, this is the way it works. Well, it must be the biggest thing in the world because it's here. Everybody must be watching. Of course they're watching the Super Bowl in Thailand, right? They're not. Not really, Certainly they're not as enthusiastic about it as you, and the odds are they're probably not watching it because a football game is on. Wait a minute. We call it football. Yeah, we do. Why? The people outside this country would like to know because many more people in the world who call a sport football are referring to something different, And it really, I think that kind of defines, nobody sees this. That's why you're on this show watching me. But to me, that really defines the United States. The audacity that we have this sport, which, by the way, no adult plays unless you're getting paid. And of course, adults in college don't get paid. I recognize that. Some manner of significant compensation. After the age of 18, you don't play it. That's a sport. It is. And this sport that is American football has never been more popular than it is today. I think we can all agree on that. Yet, participation is plummeting for obvious reasons. CTE, the information about that. So we call this a sport that becomes more popular as participation declines. Is that a sport? Is that what you would call it? I wouldn't call that a sport. I would call something like basketball a sport. By the way, I think baseball is in kind of the same category. It is in the same category as American football. So don't get me wrong. I'm not singling out American football as this awful thing. But we're going to be visiting, by the way, coming up with Andrew Marchand, and we'll do that at 12:45 coming up. And then later we'll talk to Mike Coppinger. Mike Coppinger of The Athletic will join us, and we'll talk more about boxing and DAZN and what's going on with the story that Andrew broke today. So, but to finish my point, and Lord knows, Cam, if this isn't the greatest example of Jesus, it takes me a long time to get to. But here's the question, Cam Smith, our producer. Do you think that American football is the most popular and or prominent cultural tradition that is completely unique to the United States? Of all our cultural traditions, right? Which so many of them, in fact, I can't really name many that aren't adopted in some way around the world by other countries, other people outside our borders. Of all of our traditions, the question is the most prominent of those traditions that is not around the world and is wildly popular today. In fact, I consider it to be the most popular cultural tradition that is unique to the United States, American football. That's the question, Cam. And that would be a great poll. I should put that on Twitter. Might be a little too involved, I guess, or maybe not. But I think you have to lay out the context of it when you ask the question, because even though these things are really, I think it's really interesting that we're a country that is defined more than any country in history. I mean, British, there's a few. The British, the Roman Empire. But in this age of technology, right, which also, doesn't necessarily play a role in it being a driving force. I think all of these things took place well before we had cell phones, which is really remarkable. But and I think the greatest example you can give is in Asia, they're walking around wearing suits, and that doesn't represent traditional dress in those countries for thousands and it still is traditional dress, what they have. That's not a suit, I guess. But that has gone on for thousands of years, yet they're adopting, in things that only involve that country, customs in the way that they dress. I mean, that's pretty significant. And there's many, many other examples, not to mention currency, right? So that's why the whole point of me bringing this up, this is a sports generated discussion. When you look at American football, it's unique to the United States. No matter how hard we try, nobody wants it, right? It's the one thing. We're good. We'll take this KFC over here. That's fine. Give me that McChicken right there. For the American football thing, you can have it, and God knows we've tried, but I mean, you cannot escape it here in the United States. It's never been more popular. And my point is, it's the most popular cultural tradition unique to the United States that exists today. Of course, it hasn't always been that way. In fact, it almost became extinct. But what saved it? What saved American football in this country? The stadium. Because the stadium created permanence and created the idea that this was a credible endeavor. And the first stadium built for American football was built by the most famous educational institution on earth in history, Harvard. Well, I shouldn't say that. That's a typical provincial American saying that. You've got Oxford, you got Cambridge, there's other examples. Sorry about that. But the United States, Harvard built the first big concrete football stadium. It was the first concrete stadium built since the Colosseum in Rome. And we built it for what? Not baseball in 1903, football. That's what saved football at the time. And that's why we have it today. And that's what invented spectator sports. Remember I said earlier, how is it that, wait a minute, the less people play it, the more popular it gets? Yeah, that's a spectator sport. That's how it works. And that's American football. I'm not saying that's related to why people haven't adopted around the world. Maybe that is part of the reason. But so now that I've laid that out, place yourself in Apple's shoes. And you've got this custom, this pastime, this tradition in the United States that's never been more popular as to be physically inescapable. And you have these resources. You have this captive audience with iPhones. And that's something Disney, with ESPN, they don't have that. They're beholden in many ways. I mean, they're beholden to cable distributors, but they're beholden, of course, to Apple in many ways. And that's why Bob Iger was on the board. Bob Iger, the guy who runs Disney, was on the board of Apple for many years. Well, he's not anymore. Why? Because of this new streaming service. And now all of a sudden, Apple's talking to the Pac-12, right? And nobody else is talking about it besides our show and the Wall Street Journal reporter who broke the news, who used to cover sports and now covers Apple, right? So here's my point, that I'm not just saying, don't be surprised if you wait. No, I'm not saying that. I think we're going to wake up in the not too distant future and we're going to find out Apple has Pac-12 football games on that are exclusive to their streaming service. And that will be that will only be the beginning. Because if they get in deeper, because it's a great strategy for their streaming service, it's the strategy to me. If they start to get involved, what do you think Amazon is going to do? What's Google going to do? Right? And they're in the same boat as Apple. They have all these, Amazon Prime, and you've got Google cell phones and Google search. They have access to all those people already. So the Pac-12 wouldn't have to worry about, or any conference or school wouldn't have to worry about, I can't see the games. No. Do you have an iPhone? Right. Go to your computer. You're fine. You're all set. You're good. And of course, Apple TV Plus is something people don't complain about, trying to be able to watch it on their television. That's already been taken care of. But I want to mention real fast before we have Andrew Marchand on, I want to mention how at USC what's going on, because Steve Lopes was fired after 35 years. He's the guy, when you think about the athletic director at US, who was the AD at USC? It was Pat Hayden, Lynn Swan, Mike Garrett. No. They were not the AD. They were not running the athletic department the way we would understand an AD would run it. They weren't the AD. They were there for fundraising and PR. That's it. The guy running the day-to-day in the athletic department was Steve Lopes. He was fired a couple of days ago. But he's the guy who had been supporting Clay Helton and that nobody talked about. Why is that? Because his son had been given a scholarship by Clay Helton to play football at USC. He should not have been given that scholarship. He was not good enough. And of course, he could have gone to USC anyway for free because his dad was the de facto AD at the school and he'd have free tuition. Now, Matt Lopes, Steve Lopes' son, young son, is on the coaching staff of Clay Helton right as he gets done playing when he shouldn't even be on the team. So the dynamic in play here is the media who covers USC, who knows about this, they if they know about this, they probably know Matt Lopes, or they're aware of the situation. They have a relationship with Steve Lopes, and Matt Lopes is a young guy. I don't want to mess up his career. Now he's on the coaching staff. Well, Helton is using that to his advantage. So people don't know who's supporting him at USC. They don't know why he was retained. Well, the guy that retained him essentially, along with Carol Folt, it wasn't Mike Bone, it was Steve Lopes. But of course, Mike Bone's a real athletic director, unlike the other guys, and there's no need for Steve Lopes. And I believe that's why he was fired. But it's been reported as Lopes was involved in the college admissions scandal. And we're going to have Andrew coming up. I don't want to get too deep into it, but that's what I really want to talk about. The college admissions scandal at USC, which you know about, Lori Loughlin and Becky and all that stuff, and the USC athletic department, and this de facto AD, Steve Lopes, was just fired because he reportedly was involved in the scandal. Well, if he was involved in the scandal, do you understand the gravity of that? What that means if he really was involved in the scandal. So that's, to me, the $1 million question going forward as far as the USC football program. And I said football is concerned because we already know from the original indictments, and so many people have pled guilty, that a big part of this scheme and scandal of the whole thing was faking that you were a USC athlete, right? Faking it to get into school as a loophole. And Donna Heinel, the assistant AD, who's now facing a long term of prison, they phonied up these things for people to make them look like athletes, and then went to admissions at USC, got them to sign off, got them in as athletes when they otherwise wouldn't have gotten in because their grades weren't good enough. Well, football players were some of those fake profiles. Football. So if football was used, it's hard to imagine at USC inside the athletic department, since Donna Heinel was the assistant AD in the mastermind, it's hard to imagine that Clay Helton didn't know about that. Really hard. almost impossible to imagine that Steve Lopes didn't know, because someone's coming into school, they have to go through the athletic department, right? And they were as fake football players, and they're using that to get into school. And the football team, the coaching staff doesn't know about it. They knew about it. And that's the elephant in the room. And that's possibly what's in play here with Steve Lopes. Possibly. But I want to get further into it. But before I do that's what we're going to do coming up, because this is something that could represent a catastrophe for USC football. If and when we find out that Helton and others were involved, maybe payments, it's possible. But we're going to have Andrew Marchand coming up, and he's been on fire. He's been on fire lately with, some of his reporting, and including a report that has come out as recent as yesterday, in which he has broken the news, I should say, that Antonio Brown has received an offer of over $1 million to engage in a boxing match with this YouTube star, Logan Paul. And like I said, YouTube star. So I know Justin Bieber is somebody who has challenged other celebrities to boxing matches in the past. And DAZN, DAZN, that's run by John Skipper of ESPN. Mr. Sports, Mr. Everything in sports for many years. Well, he's left ESPN now. He's at DAZN. And now they're getting into the business of celebrity. It's celebrity boxing. That's what it is, right? Celebrity boxing. I think it's not being branded that way. And we're going to talk to Mike Coppinger about it, who is the boxing reporter in the industry. And it's going to be fascinating to find out because I don't know how he feels about this, because DAZN is, mainstream boxing in his world, a big part of the boxing world. That's where Canelo Alvarez fights. That's where Triple G fights. That's where Anthony Joshua fights. The Anthony Joshua Ruiz upset was on DAZN. It's a big deal. It's a mainstream broadcaster, not to mention the Pat McAfee show every day. That's where Adnan Virk was doing baseball last season. So now we've got celebrity boxing. And to me, it comes off as an act of desperation to get subscribers and generate revenue, attention. And if DAZN, which we've been told wants to, with its end game in the United States at least, acquire the broadcast rights to some of the major league sports leagues or major college leagues. I'm not saying this is a deal breaker. It isn't necessarily. But to me, it's not a good look. More than anything, it looks like their business is struggling. It looks like they're struggling getting viewers. Well, I mean, they've got Pat McAfee. He's great. But you need more than just Pat McAfee. And we're going to talk to Andrew because nobody is plugged in more. And obviously with this news that he just broke, I want to get his take on what's going on at DAZN outside of that, because Jamie Horowitz is there, the guy who created Skip Bayless. You would probably not know Skip Bayless at this point if it wasn't for Jamie Horowitz. And Stephen A. Smith, arguably, I don't think it's arguably. I think there's a good chance that he wouldn't be making what he's making and be the level of celebrity that he is. In fact, he might not even be at ESPN at this point if it wasn't for Jamie Horowitz. So this guy, and then you got Skip and Shannon Sharp and so many other people in a whole genre. And it started with this guy, Jamie Horowitz. He's at DAZN now. Same place that Antonio Brown, maybe, as part of this breaking news by Andrew Marchand. In that Marchand is reporting that DAZN is attempting to get Antonio Brown with a big fat financial offer to fight in a boxing match, Logan Paul. And it's a fascinating story. And at the same time that's happening, of course, we have this awful video that unfortunately is something that is in no way surprising and involves behavior that has gone on for some time, right? Nothing was telegraphed more than his behavior, Brown, with police and his girlfriend and his children the other day. Nothing was telegraphed more than that situation, based on Brown's behavior prior to that, for a long time out in front of everybody. Now, that didn't prevent Sean Payton from bringing him in, or Bill Belichick, but I think now we have crossed the Rubicon, and I think part of that could be, when you see this breaking news from our guest who joins us now, Andrew Marchand of the New York Post, who's been on fire. I shouldn't even say that, because it's not like he's on fire. The guy is breaking something every week. That's a big story. So it's just, you're at another level. I don't want to put you on the spot, Andrew. I don't want to sound obsequious, but I mean, you are.
First off, I gotta look up what obsequious means, but you're impressing me, Brooks.
Well, it's reality. Yeah. So again, I mean, so we wake up yesterday, and here you are with a huge story, Antonio Brown. What's going on with Antonio Brown? And now this, celebrity boxing? What's happening with that?
Yeah, it looks like it could happen. Logan Paul, who is, of course, a humongous YouTube star, has 20 million followers on YouTube, so very popular with the younger generation. He fought in, I think, November on DAZN and against another YouTuber, KS1. I'm getting familiar with all these people. Anyways, they fought, yeah. And DAZN they did very well. They had very good engagement, and their subscribers went up. So they put it kind of into their business plan. And yes, they're going to have the legit fights of Canelo, etc. But these kind of celebrity death matches, if you will, they're into it. And so Logan Paul has already signed on. And Antonio Brown has an offer out for 7 figures plus. And depending on how many subscribers they bring in, if the fight in fact happens, they'll make even more money. So it's an interesting addition to the DAZN business model. And for Antonio Brown, he's a sad case, Antonio Brown, in my opinion, right now. So it's a little bit like watching a train wreck. So DAZN is willing to get in business with him there. Obviously, it's a big payday for him. He squandered a lot of money last year in the NFL, and the way the timeline would work out, he still could, be back for the NFL after training for this fight that they're hoping will be in April.
Now, I got to stop you right there, because you said one thing there that just changed what I'm going to ask you right at the end. You said, well, he squandered some money. Now, I hadn't heard that, or I don't know. I mean, the guy's made a lot of money, and you're talking about $1 million. Well, my next question is really kind of related. You've got the $1 million figure, or excess of $1 million, but then you also have the buys and all that, what that represents, subscribers and things. What's the potential you think that Antonio Brown could clear from this?
Yeah, I don't know. I tried to find out that number, of course, but I was unable to really get it. I do think it could be a couple million. Right. These fights and the amount, if you think about, again, I don't know how the incentives work exactly, but if you're charging $20 a month, and if they're able, you just do it times X, it can add up pretty quickly. And so, again, I don't know how they make their formula, but it's not probably just a $20 thing. It's probably over, I would presume, over the year. So, that's a pretty good outlay, $100 over the year. And if they're getting a cut of that and they bring in 10,000 people, I mean, the numbers can get pretty high pretty quickly, or 100,000 people, It could be very lucrative for Antonio Brown, right. And he's just a little unpredictable.
Is it in any way you think related to the state of his financial condition right now?
I have no idea about that. When I was saying he squandered a lot of money, though, he had a $30 million contract with the Raiders, and
right. That's what you meant. Okay,
that's what I meant. Sorry. No, I don't know of like his personal finances.
Breaking news.
Yeah. No, I don't know about his personal finances, but he did have I do know he had a $30 million contract. And I believe he was going to get 9 from New England. And his NFL contracts are so screwed up. These guys don't end up with any of their money, it seems like. But he really didn't end up with a lot of his money, where obviously if he just had kept his mouth shut, even if he didn't play well, he would be a much richer man.
We're visiting with Andrew Marchand of the New York Post, sports media columnist. And when I see this story, I probably don't read it like most people, in that I think about John Skipper, and I think about what John Skipper has told us about DAZN and their strategy that they have attempted to employ to a certain extent, but it seems like they're backtracking on that strategy, and that is developing a relationship with leagues through kind of proof of concept with the Adnan Virk baseball highlight show. There had been talk of doing other highlight shows, all with the ultimate end game being acquiring, major league broadcast rights throughout all of the big sports, perhaps, and college football, college basketball down the line. That was the strategy, as I understand it, from John Skipper as to where DAZN was going. When I see this and I see Antonio Brown's name attached to it, it's hard for me to imagine that fits into what has been portrayed by DAZN and Skipper in the past. Am I overreacting to that? Is this just a little thing and that doesn't represent where they're going?
No, I don't think. Well, I think that you're right and you're wrong. When you have to think, if you're them, about your brand and what you're trying to represent. And these fights are obviously, this isn't the top level of boxing. There's a celebrity, and it gives you a lot of publicity, which they like because of the reach that these guys have in social media. So that is helpful for their brand as they grow. But you also want to be known if you go to the NFL. And they have relationships with the NFL in places like Canada and overseas where DAZN is also operating. So, but when you go there with your American product and the next round of negotiations, DAZN's definitely going to be at the table. Now, will they really be heard? That's a question. So I think you can go in a couple of different directions here. And they do need content. They need subscribers. So I can understand the play with this Paul Brown fight. Which is actually pretty good, Paul Brown there. The Paul Brown
NFL.
fight, NFL. So, but I think the overall strategy, though, you do need so you add the Adnan Virk baseball show. I would presume, I don't know any numbers. I can't imagine that's getting.
They were not good.
No, they were not good. Yeah, now they're not getting a lot of people to watch them. However, and the $100 million per year outlay seems ridiculous. However, if you want to get in the baseball business and you want to have a chance to actually have baseball games on DAZN, you first have to probably put a toe in the water, and and you have to have proof that you can put this up. And the technology seems very sound that DAZN has, and that's been pretty much proven with the fights, I think, where their technology is top notch. But you have to get in with these leagues, and it's not as easy, especially in the American market, as opposed to others around the world where there's less players. So I do think you can do a couple of things. I don't think I've been a John Skipper critic for his work at ESPN, but in this case, I think you can do both. Now, you can think about brand, but they don't have.
I'm
they don't
with
have
you.
luxury.
By the way, I'm with you.
Yeah.
I agree.
They don't have the luxury of waiting. I mean, they don't have the luxury. It's not like the NFL, baseball. Everything's they're coming up every year. These deals come up 3 years, 4 years. So you have to be positioned with enough subscribers to make it worth the while. I don't think like 1 million subscribers, and obviously it would grow if the NFL went there. But the NFL would probably do a deal if you only have 1 million subscribers. You need to outlay before that, not just where you're going to build off the NFL's back. Now, obviously, there's a number maybe where the NFL might be like, all right, this is so crazy, we got to do it. But I think that you need a service as well.
No one is more enthusiastic about DAZN becoming a player. It's just when I see this, and I know John Skipper's not enthusiastic about it. Maybe he's changed his mind, but the fact that this happened, it might or might not indicate that his power at DAZN perhaps is in decline. Perhaps his plan is not something that they view now as practical.
Why do you say that? Why do you say that?
Because I know for a fact from sources that I've talked to that John Skipper wanted no part of this YouTube stuff. I'm with you. I don't think it's a big deal, but I do think that when you look at the leadership, Murkowski and everybody there, this may be saying, well, this is my opinion of what's going on, that they've heard, okay, we want to be big players, and they have broadcast rights around the world. That makes sense, and they're not necessarily departing from that strategy. But they bring in Adnan Virk, and I had heard and reported that they were going to do other highlight shows as really proof of concept to show the leagues that they could execute. And the Adnan Virk numbers were so poor that management inside of the zone, outside of Skipper, may or may not have questioned his strategy. And then you get these things happening as subsequently you have this YouTube stuff. And I know for a fact that he's not enthusiastic about it. He's not violently opposed to it. Now, but there's a couple of other things I think are really interesting. I want to get your opinion on, because I think the best thing that they've done so far is bring in Pat McAfee and his show. In fact, I think Pat McAfee's show is the best daytime talk show. And it's unique because he's a solo host and he doesn't lean on sidekicks, but it's the best daytime talk show out there. So I really like that. And then you also have Jamie Horowitz there. And so, I mean, what are your thoughts on where they may be going with Jamie Horowitz? I don't know if you know what's happening. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but what are your thoughts about Jamie Horowitz? Because he's been there a while now, and I'm assuming we're going to hear something. And could Pat McAfee be part of what could be a daytime slate of shows? You know,
oh, you're saying so you think Jamie's going to put together more show? Well,
right.
Look, I mean, the way that Jamie Horowitz looks at McAfee's show is a couple of things. Obviously, it gives them daily content, but in a bigger thing, it's the way they're trying to market themselves. So if you have Pat McAfee out front, has a lot of Twitter followers, a very passionate group behind him, that's a way to get in front of people, get brand awareness. With the fight they had, the English heavyweight champ, Brooks,
Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua.
Yeah, exactly.
And Ruiz,
Anthony Joshua. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So they had the documentary on those two guys.
Right.
And so their thought process there was to put that on YouTube, make it free, and so so anybody could see it, and then bring people back and kind of long tail it to the zone and the pay distribution model. So yeah, so I think Jamie Horowitz, I don't know if you're saying there's going to be an uprising. Jamie was brought in by Skipper, so I don't know. Yeah, I don't know anything about anything about that. As far as I can tell, they're working closely together.
Yeah. I do think we're going to hear something. Got to be developing some shows, and so.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It's just a little confused right now. Maybe it isn't with the celebrity boxing thing, but I'm 100% on board with, dude. It's no big deal, you know, because I mean, these sports networks, they'll do anything. And it's not like that's much different than what ESPN might do maybe a little differently, or Fox or FS1, whatever. So I don't think it's that big of a deal. I'm just trying to read the tea leaves, and there's nobody better literally walking around right now to wildly over speculate with than Andrew Marchand of the New York Post. Now you wrote
one last thing, Brooksy. Let me say one last thing. Just one last thing about that. I will say they're in an insurgent position. And so you do have to take some chances. So I can understand it with that. I'll just leave it on that.
I love it. I want them to be big players. I'm rooting for them. And I love Pat McAfee. In fact, I'm just going to throw this out there and just toss this bomb out. If I was Fox, if I was Eric Shanks, I would be calling CAA to find out about Pat McAfee's contract status and try to make him the face of my college football game day. Foxes, because of course Urban is temporary. This is all just me.
Sure, he's gonna stuff. Well, yeah, but they kind of went for a different model. I think one thing is certain right now is that McAfee in College Game Day, that his role, at least at the moment, is going to grow because they like that experiment. Corso is kind of the zany guy. I'm not saying McAfee's going to replace Corso. I don't think he'd be in that analyst role, but in kind of, I think McAfee is a guy on the way up. Not perfect, but on the way up. And so he is, I mean, I think when you look at Fox, I think they liked what they did. If Urban doesn't look like he's coaching, at least at the moment, if he doesn't, I guess there really aren't any openings left. So it looks like he'll be back. So at least one more year, they'll go with that. I do think they were smart to try the really focus on football and not try to out game day, which I don't think they really tried to do.
Boy, I mean, every single day you have something going on that nobody else has going on, that this story is going to pop up. All of a sudden, we're going to hear about Drew Brees. You know, wait a minute, Drew Brees is brought. Well, you've been writing about it, right? And so what's the story with Drew Brees? And I also want to talk to you about the whole Romo and Monday Night Football rumors and Jim Nantz. But tell us about what you have on Drew Brees.
Well, Drew Brees, first off, I think most people think he's going to play. And then other people I've spoken to also think that, these guys now, he's made a lot of money, hundreds of millions. And so maybe not 200, but near there, maybe above. I'm not exactly sure, but he's made a lot of money. So he doesn't need, and he has a young family that I think he wants to be around. So he might not be interested in the broadcast booth. But if he comes out, he will have interest from basically every network and in terms of what he wants to do. Because, and I think it's kind of obvious if you look at what these network executives look for the most part, they love the former great quarterback who's been pretty good with the media. I mean, I don't think Breeze has that sense of humor from what I can tell from afar, but again, an analytical mind who might be good or might not be. So it was interesting. Adam Schefter put it out there first. He didn't really have much to the story because he said that it wasn't ESPN, but he didn't say what network had called him. It turned out CBS had placed a call to Breeze, which is interesting in the fact that they have Romo, but they've always liked
very
him.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, but they're doing their due diligence. So I mean, I personally didn't make a bigger deal of it. I mean, you could have a nice headline on that, go for some clicks if you wanted to, but I don't really think that's. I think they're doing their due diligence, and of course, they don't know what's going to happen with Romo exactly. They're going to try to keep him very aggressively, but they don't know, for sure. But Breeze, if ESPN did not get Romo and Breeze did retire and he's still out there, I'm sure they'll make a huge run. He'll be on their list to make a run at to try to put him in that booth and try to make it a little bit more special.
Now, there's no way we're going to finish this conversation without me mentioning Big Mike. But before I do, okay. you wrote the Sports Pope. You wrote really the definitive dissertation on the future of the Monday Night Football booth. And so, kind of lay out where you think that's going. Obviously, there's been a report about Romo but what are your thoughts on what ESPN, what Disney is doing? Not only with the Monday Night Football booth, but potentially what their strategy will be in acquiring maybe some of CBS's games, something like that down the line. What do you think Disney is up to here?
I think they're up to a lot. I mean, I think number one, they won a Super Bowl. So I talked to people with the NFL and outside, and there's a disagreement of how much the booth matters in terms of the NFL.
The ratings are up.
The ratings are up, and also how much it matters to award a Super Bowl. Now, do they want to have a strong booth or super? They will, and they will make sure that gets right in their eyes, the NFL's eyes, and in ESPN's eyes, and obviously the public's eyes before they had a Super Bowl. But do they have to have it in place now when the Super Bowl that they will broadcast is probably 5 years at the earliest down the line? I don't think so. But that said, if you're ESPN and you're Disney and you want a Super Bowl and you go there and you said, we just got Tony Romo, we are serious about this, that can't hurt you. Yep. It can only help you. Tony Romo's the biggest name in sportscasting right now, rising star. And so they're going to be all in. I reported this a week and a half, that was like 2 weeks ago, and I put it like the seventh graph because I've heard some rumors, but there's nothing definitive in terms of what will be offered. But I did say 10+ million and 6 years is a possibility. Thank
you for noting that, by the way, the timing of your report. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean,
seriously.
I appreciate you kind of pointing out, but whatever, you can go crazy about these things, and I just try to do a good job. And obviously, you want credit, and trust me, I sometimes say things, but for the most part, you can't worry about when that happens, or someone else kind of reports exactly what you've already written, right. And sort of doesn't give credit, whatever. Anyhow, but the bottom line is what people care about. So in CBS, though, I've been told is, and this isn't necessarily surprising, except if you know CBS's history, CBS is going to be aggressive. I think they're going to play financially with ESPN. So that will be a bidding war, I believe. Bidding war is kind of the wrong term because at the end of the day, CBS has the right to match. So ESPN can put out a number and say, CBS, you want this? You're paying him. Again, in that report that came out, they had it wrong. He's actually making more closer to 3 this year, the way his contract was constructed. The first year, he was closer to 4 because they had Thursday Night Football. Second year, they had the Super Bowl, which brought his number up. And then this year, they don't have either. So it's a little bit lower. So he's coming from 3 million. So the money could get pretty nuts because ESPN obviously has not been able to solve that Monday night booth. And if they could just say, look, we got Tony Romo, that would be a pretty easy way to solve it.
I think this is going to be this is just my opinion. I don't have any information to this effect, But and maybe a little foreshadowing was what happened with CBS, the SEC, and ESPN and Disney. And I'm not saying that was a ridiculous deal that CBS had. So it's kind of an aberration unrelated to this. But I think this may be a situation where CBS is kind of like a wounded lion. There's blood in the water here because it's a small company compared to the other big ones anyway. In as we're talking about the amount of resources that they could allocate to bid for NFL rights. So in my mind, when you look at what Disney paid for Monday Night Football, I think this is an opening for them. Pitaro has done a great job repairing that relationship. The fact that you're even bringing up the Super Bowl, that would never be happening. We wouldn't be talking about that if this was 2 years ago. So Pitaro has done a masterful job. Now it seems that CBS may be on the run. And I think you brought up the number one point. When it comes to the Super Bowl, or comes to trying to get part of that CBS package, I think the NFL will probably try to keep CBS around as a bidder and throw them a bone. But, when you look at how these things are playing out, it certainly appears to me that Disney wants some Sunday games. Could you foresee that?
Definitely. I think I wrote about that last January in terms of that Disney, contemplating going for a Sunday package. Now, look, I think they're going to go for multiple packages. From what I understand, and this is sort of like, I don't really, when I go on these shows, I don't like to say things I haven't reported. So this isn't like fully 100%, but I think CBS is more willing just to stick with what they have. The other networks are interested in adding to what they have and bidding on other things. Fox has shown it's ultra aggressive in the live sports space with their new strategy with Fox, and they got Thursday Night Football. And they have a great relationship with the NFL. So I think they're well positioned to keep their package or add something or change. NBC, I do think the NFL is very happy with NBC's product and what they've developed. Highest rated show over the last 9 years in primetime TV. And then ESPN, ABC, they want more. It will be interesting. And then, of course, we haven't even gotten to the over-the-top platforms. Could Amazon get in? I think that's next. I mean, I'm not saying they won't do what they're doing now, where they're getting some rights, but not exclusive rights. I think it would be a minimal package if they get in, in a exclusive package. I think it would be minimal, where it's a lot of money and they kind of try it out.
But this Tony Romo thing. And the fact that you brought it up and I thought about it in the context of trying to get the Super Bowl and Disney trying to get more NFL. And now we've got to me, this is one of the more fascinating scenarios that's ever played out. When you look at CBS. Now, when we had Mike McCarthy on, he said that Jim Nantz could be a big part of this deal, potentially for Disney, as it pertains to Monday Night Football or getting Romo. Do you think Nantz
What do you mean? They're going to get Nantz?
Yes. I mean, he could be in play. I mean, he is in play. Theoretically, that's what Mike indicated on the show. Okay.
I don't know Nantz's contract status.
Right.
I tend to doubt Jim Nantz.
That's a tough unless they get Sunday games. If they were to get a Sunday package.
Yeah, but Jim Nantz, when I say Jim Nantz, what's the first sport you think of?
CBS.
No, so what sport though?
The Masters? NFL?
Yeah, golf.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
So he's a golf guy. I mean, is he really going to leave CBS and that golf package that he loves? I mean, when you think about Jim Nantz, he's pretty good on football, and he's okay on basketball, but he bleeds golf, and so I don't see him leaving that opportunity and that association, especially with the Masters. He just that's what he is. So I don't see that. I mean, I'm not saying it's anything's possible. I really tend to doubt it. And CBS is built around Jim Nantz. ESPN, of course, he'd be important there, but he'd be a big cog, but a cog. There, he's like there. It's about him and Sean McManus. That's what CBS is about.
And when you now I'll say, well, ESPN Disney's made inroads into the Masters, haven't they? Interesting, right? We're talking about golf, but I will say this: the Masters truly is an outlier in that money's not a huge thing to them. If there was ever, a property where Disney just couldn't throw money at it and get it, it's the Masters. So that really bodes well, I think, for CBS.
Yeah, and I don't think Jim Nance is going to go and then hope that they get the Masters.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I just think I don't see that. Like, so,
Right.
you know, I just don't see Nance really in play in this. Again, it's probably not impossible, but he's got everything. You know, the kingdom is his at CBS. I get it. We can make a big thing about the Romo relationship with Nance. I think they've done well on the air together.
So we're visiting with Andrew Marchand of the New York Post, sports media columnist and oracle, as far as I'm concerned. And now, as we talk about the Romo situation, if ESPN were to get him, they put him in a booth. Do they put him in there with Joe Tessitore? Because I think that would be the scenario that I would want if I was ESPN, because I think Joe Tessitore, and I want to ask you about that question, but also another question. If you put Al Michaels or Jim Nance or Joe Buck in Joe Tessitore's shoes over the last 2 years, with all those blowouts, with two complete novice partners who'd never done color before in a game on that platform, with the Booger Mobile, with no other games to talk about, it's really a perfect storm nightmare, I think, for a broadcaster. And then you look at what Joe was last year, which he still was college football, a little over the top. And to me, he has toned it down. And so do you think that there's any other guy that could have gone in there and done a better job? And what do you think ultimately is going to happen there if Romo were to come over?
Well, to answer your question, could someone have done a better job? Yeah, I think, like, if you look at Al Michaels, he's probably
I'm not
the
so
best
sure.
ever. I think here's the bigger point. Here's the bigger point. Here's the bigger point. The bigger point is this, I think, and it's a very good point you made, is that the Monday night booth is the most scrutinized booth there is. Okay. On top of that, and because of this, and on top of it, is it has the worst games for number one team. Just, you know, on Sundays, Fox with Joe Buck and Troy Aikman, and CBS with Nance and Romo, they're getting basically almost every week their top game. Sometimes there's an anomaly where they don't schedule exactly right, but they're getting a good game. And it's regionalized, so it's not everybody. And for the most part, people are really into those games. Monday and Sunday night, same thing, top game. The Monday night game, sometimes you get a good game, but a lot of times you don't. So you're getting to that Monday. A lot of fantasy players interested in Monday Night Football, so they're watching. Gamblers.
By the way, that's a great point. That's a great point because of the Booger criticism. Because I think people look at this Booger and he's trending every Monday. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because the fantasy people, I think, really do amp up that. Not that it's not justified in many cases,
yep.
But I think it's not really as bad as you think in fantasy. I think it's a great point on this.
Well, and then there's more of a focus on the announcers. Most people, if you look at social media, for the most part, they don't really like it. Like Joe Buck is an excellent broadcaster. I think that, to me,
well, some people might not like him. I put Tessitore.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm not talking about Tessitore, but I'm saying, okay. But if you look at Joe Buck, like on Twitter, he'll get crushed. And yeah, of course, Joe Tess. I've written that. I don't know if Joe Tess's style is perfect for Monday Night Football
changed.
and NFL.
Don't you think it's changed?
Yes, it has. He toned it down as it's gone, and he's found his voice more. And he has not been put in an ideal situation. Neither is Booger, though. I mean, people kill Booger, but like Booger literally had never worked in a football booth before he did Monday Night Football. Yeah, exactly. So they put him there. That's like I don't know, I've said this to like an agent. It's like it's like putting an intern and saying you have a big contract deal to do and you put the intern there. And I'm not saying, obviously Booger has great football knowledge, but just knowing the mechanics of it. So yeah, could Tess survive this? He might be able to, and he might, style wise, to me, he's not necessarily, I think he's better on college, better on boxing.
He's not Jim Nance, because this is all about Romo, this conversation. He's not a warm conversational
He's more of a
guy.
shoot. He's kind of, I would say, he's a little bit shoot first guy. Nance is in his own way. It's a subtle way where he's a little bit shoot first. But Tess is a little bit more of a shoot first guy in terms of a point guard, and that can be effective. And when he really revs it up on some big college games, which he's done, or boxing, it hits. The problem, and we just hit on it, and this isn't his fault, is that when you have these stinkers of games, and you're trying to keep an audience, it's just difficult. Look, and your overall point is correct. I mean, you're right. If you put Buck and Aikman, Michaels and Collinsworth, any of these crews, Nance and Romo, and they had to fill, exactly, and you don't have good games, they just would be exposed, not exposed, but it just wouldn't be looked upon as good. When the games are 34-30 in the last 5 minutes and it's Green Bay Cowboys, then everyone's watching, they're pumped in. And also, I would also argue on Sundays, you're not as dialed in to the broadcasters. You got 100 games going on. Most people, it's the weekend. You're doing 100 different things. Monday night, you settle down. It's like, the weekend, I got to start the work. The first day of the end of the work week, and you're kind of tired. And so, like, the announcers, and again, you might not have interest in either team. You might have some fantasy interest. You might not. You might just be watching the game. And so the announcers become a bigger part of it. So ESPN, regardless, Joe Tess, Booger, whatever they do, they need to figure it out, because even though the ratings were up, they got to get that right, because it's been too long for them. For now 2 years after they let go of Sean McDonough, Gruden left, and the big mistake they made was years ago. They should have kept Tirico. They might have gotten Peyton Manning if they
catastrophic mistake, and it would have worked out perfectly, because now Mike is kind of stuck, and that may, from some people are saying, oh, no biggie, he'll be fine. He's still going to hang out and wait for out. I'm not so sure. We'll have to see. But I just wanted to, and you don't have to respond to this because I want to ask you about Big Mike, because I've already kept you too long.
Okay.
But I just wanted to point out two other things.
I got a story that's breaking too. It's coming.
I know you do. I told my producer there's no way he's coming on today. No chance. Because you have a damn story every day.
I wrote it before. You put me on deadline. So
let me just, 2 quick points though. In the context of Monday Night Football, and I don't know Joe Tess, don't care. But he is, when you think about Howard Cosell is an institution associated with Monday Night Football, and that sort of style kind of fits with Joe Tess, in his style. So that's one point. And the other is what you mentioned earlier, the ratings. The ratings are up. So I think people should rule out, if Romo were to come over, that Joe Tess, and I think Joe Tess should hang around. The way you laid it out, it really looks good what he's done. And so, but I want to ask you about Francesa, because what's played out over the last few months, dude, it's like mind-boggling how the guy has gone into a death spiral. So, describe a little bit of that before we let you go. What's been happening with Big Night? How do you feel about all this stuff?
Well, I would say this. Number one, let's compliment Mike. Tremendous businessman.
You're complimenting it. You're complimenting it.
Look, he's doing an hour and a half. He's doing an hour on radio.com, a half an hour on radio, and I don't know the number, but he might be making 7 figures. Wow. That's pretty good considering he's not putting much effort in, and he's got a 3-year deal here. So you have to give him credit there. But in terms of how this has ended, it hasn't been a good.
Why did what happened? What did the ratings go down? He just decided to quit again. Why is it happening?
Yeah, look, he seemed uninterested for a long time, even before the first retirement. He seemed uninterested, and now he's but he got a nice little parachute when to leave. He got a 3-year contract to do an hour on radio.com, which it's from 5 to 6 Eastern time, which is against their new afternoon show, Joe and Evan, which makes zero sense in my mind. You're taking the audience that you have to figure who's going to go to this radio.com, people who used to listen to Mike. So where are you taking him from? They're taking him from potential listeners to Joe and Evan. He's not a national show.
Entercom is a disaster. Entercom is a disaster.
This is what I say, Brooks. I always say this. In 2001, I was the Met beat writer for the New York Post. So I've covered the Mets. Entercom is the worst organization I've ever covered.
Dude, I worked for them. I launched a radio station for them.
Yeah,
and worked for a couple of years with David Field himself.
Okay.
So, and I'm not saying he was bad, but it is unbelievable.
I'm not saying any of them are bad personally, and I think they're trying hard. It might even work out. I just think they treat people poorly. That's
and
really
the contract stuff. Nobody has their contract and all that.
So they don't treat people correctly. Right. And they're a little naive, like how they treated the Bart Scott situation. They thought they demoted him when Mike came back. They let go of one of his partners, Chris Carlin, who he's very tight with, and then they put him on the back burner as they waited for Mike to make a decision. And then they're like, "Oh, you're leaving?" Like they're like shocked he's leaving and want to offer him money all of a sudden. It's like he just treated me like garbage, and then you want me to stay? That doesn't make any sense.
So ultimately, what happened was they're giving him money to leave, or at least shuffle off. No,
I don't think so.
Right.
No, I don't think that's true. I think
leave going on radio.com to me is leaving.
But if he wanted to stay on, I think they would have let him do whatever he wanted.
Really?
I think they would have let him do whatever he wanted.
Wow.
Mike kind of was driving that. Even though he lost the ratings,
Okay.
got crushed that last book, I still think that, and maybe they have the numbers now. There are people who doubt it who I talk to. I don't see the actual. Who knows? I mean, I think they feel like he's a revenue driver, and he may still be because it might impress some people who advertise with them to meet Mike Francesa maybe, or to advertise on his show.
So if he's just doing this all voluntarily, what role do you think Funhouse played in this? Because I think Mike here, this is my conspiracy theory, because his producers, I think, blocked Funhouse like on his account. I don't think he knew what was going on for a long time. And whether it was willful ignorance or the producers had something to do with it,
I think they made a decision that Funhouse was better for them than he was worse for them. That he makes Mike more relevant than he is irrelevant, but he makes him the clown. He clowns on him.
And I think Mike discovered that, and that's why he left. I don't think Mike knew about it. Literally,
yeah, I can't say. Well, I don't know. He's mentioned him on the. I don't really know. Listen, Mike and we spoke when he first come back. We spoke a few times when I broke the story that he was coming back to FAN. That was the last time we spoke. Where he actually, for Mike, when I called him and said, "Are you going back to FAN?" and he didn't answer. I mean, Mike Francesa not speaking was no words. I should have. It was kind of monumental. But so I don't know what his true feelings on Funhouse are. I can't imagine he likes it. I mean, the guy's just kind of taking everything he says and making him look like a fool. And now the idea that Funhouse is ever he might claim he doctored stuff. I mean, that's foolish. Yeah. To even suggest that. The guy's just into it and has fun with it. And I mean, God bless him. That's a lot of time he spends listening to Mike to get these clips, but they're very popular. And I think it might have been a factor, but I can't say he's still on. So I can't say. I just think Mike didn't want to be on the air for this long, and but he wants the fame, he wants the paycheck. So he seems conflicted to me.
And putting you on the spot one more time, maybe you don't want to do it, but man, you got to get a podcast. You have to do something because it would be huge. I'm serious.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's been discussed. We'll see what happens. But
thanks so much, man. I really appreciate all this stuff. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for all the compliments. I appreciate it, Brooks.
That's Andrew Marchand of the New York Post. Coming up, we're going to talk to Mike Hoppinger of The Athletic, and we're going to talk more about what we just mentioned, Antonio Brown and DAZN and Logan Paul. Celebrity boxing, that's what it is. And after talking to Andrew, it's great having him on because nobody's more plugged into sports business media, broadcasting media, literally all around the country. You just heard it. But what's so great about doing this show is we could stretch it out. And we got a format. We got other guests. We're doing this and we're doing that. But you have the extra time that you need. And it's that extra little time where you start to grasp what's actually happening. And so in talking to him about these situations, many of which he's breaking, and by the way, it was interesting to find out that he had written 2.5 weeks ago about Romo potentially in a material way, that Romo might be going over to ESPN. And, which is one more reason to follow him. And it's Andrew Marchand, one word, on Marchand on Twitter. And that, his thoughts on Jim Nantz, right? And that Jim Nantz was a non-starter for CBS. And man, we can only talk about it so much with him, but I'm really starting to think that this is going to be like an apocalypse for CBS coming up. I'm talking about the Sunday package, because I think with Andrew placing Romo in the context of Disney getting the Super Bowl, that this could be a chip. I think that Bob Iger of Disney is going to give whoever, Jerry Jones or Roger Goodell, a blank check, fill it out. And we want all of CBS's Sunday game. We want all of what CBS has. Oh, and by the way, we already have Romo. Right? Now, one thing we didn't talk about, but when you're talking about Joe Tessitore, and I thought that's really, and I'm a former play-by-play guy, long time play-by-play. I did Major League Baseball, so couldn't be more different than this situation with Joe, which is really extraordinary to anything, but especially the way Andrew laid it out. But going in, when you look at Tessitore's performance, and I'm not killing Booger, as far as his performance this year, because when you look at the hyper scrutiny, I think he did pretty good for someone who's never done it. And I already know he's good at studio, but in the future, I think studio might be his thing. And yeah, he got jerked around. Yeah, he was placed in a difficult situation, but who's to say he won't be back? I wouldn't have a huge problem with it either way, because I think analysts are way overrated, even though we just spent 45 minutes talking about it. No, but no, I think the big thing with him is watching him most recently on the NFL draft. He's outstanding. And so I think we miss out to a certain extent when he's not in the studio. But let's say Romo comes over. I mean, now that Andrew has told us today, which we didn't have this information beforehand, that Nance isn't coming. It's not going to happen unless perhaps they get the Sunday games, Disney. Well, you're thinking what I'm thinking. If Disney gets the Sunday games and Romo, they can put Nance and Romo on the Sunday games. The other thing is, and Andrew kind of pushed back on this a little bit, Nance is associated with golf. Golf is his life. Nance is, former college golfer. That's what defines him personally. He's got a huge golf hole in his backyard, right? That's legendary. So what has Disney been doing over the last few years? Making inroads into the Masters. Not saying they're going to get it, because that's one organization, the Masters, that money isn't the primary thing. But let's say Nance agrees to perhaps go over to Disney and do Sunday games, because Disney got CBS's Sunday games, because they'll spend anything, and they've proven they will. What they're paying for Monday Night Football is by far the most paid per game for NFL games. And they've repaired the relationship. And now they want Romo. And Romo has the same agent as Joe Tessitore, right? And that agent, Nick Khan, helped ESPN get the SEC away from CBS, right? So with all those things in mind, and the point about the Masters being that if Nance knows, perhaps, that if he were to go to do games on ABC with Tony Romo in CBS's former games on Sunday for the NFL, maybe that will persuade the Masters to come over to Disney, to come over to ABC. Why not? I mean, if he's not there, if Nance isn't, I would think that one of the big reasons why CBS has the Masters is Nance. So if Nance knows he's not going to have the NFL because Bob Iger handed a blank check to the NFL, and the NFL now is willing to, take a look at it, whereas 2 years ago they would have mailed it back. We don't want it. Things have changed, and that's to Pataro's credit. I think we're on the precipice of a huge explosion in the business, and that, I mean, it couldn't be more obvious to me. And you've got a wounded animal in CBS, having lost the SEC. Clearly, they don't have the resources, and in the way that it was described to us by Andrew, they're in a defensive posture. They're trying to hold on to Romo. Well, Romo, made $3-4 million. And to me, that really explains the golf thing with him, because I was thinking, how the hell could he be going off playing golf and the prospect of missing games? Well, if he's only making $3 million compared to other big time game analysts, that's at the low end of the totem pole. But then it makes more sense. CBS wants to keep him around. They're going to do what they have to do with him, and they're not paying him a lot because CBS isn't paying anybody a lot in the context of the rest of the business, because they don't have the resources. So, man, this thing is lining up. It's being telegraphed. And the other thing about it is, again, the zone thing. And the reason I bring it up is, it's been portrayed as the Netflix of sports, which implies they're going to be a big player. And then they elucidated that situation by telling us, John Skipper, that they wanted to give broadcast rights from the big leagues. Right? That's going to be part of their business model. But come to find out, we've got celebrity boxing with YouTube stars now. And I know for a fact, I've talked to two people in the know. John Skipper's not happy. And is this a sign? You've got Jamie Horowitz sitting there, but I'm not saying nothing's going to happen there, but where are his shows? What is he doing? I know McAfee has started. He's great, but what's going on there? So coming up, we'll get a little bit on DAZN and what's happening there. Although I know Mike doesn't really focus on the YouTube celebrity boxing. He's the real thing, right? He's got the sweet science down, and we haven't talked to him in a while. And of course, we've got the big fight approaching, Fury Wilder, and we literally could do an hour on that fight easily with clips. And then of course the whole dynamic with what's happening with DAZN, not necessarily as it relates to the celebrity boxing stuff, but what's going to happen with Canelo and with Oscar, what the latest on that is, because that is it's a totally unreported story, completely unreported. And, where does he see that going? Because I think someone like Canelo, to me, if you said, Brooks, you can watch one guy, I'm going to ask Mike this, because I'm going to ask him this question so I can answer it first, right? But if you gave me one guy I could watch right now, maybe Teofimo Lopez would be in that category, but it would be Canelo. And for some reason, we don't treat it that way. We don't give him. We don't. For some reason, we don't give Canelo Alvarez that sort of credit, and which is really a shame. And I think now that he's over at DAZN, it's just worse. And so I want to know, what is his future there? Because he's still young enough. Some people have said, well, this was kind of the last big deal, perhaps, of his career. And why wouldn't it be? God knows he's been in the ring a lot as an amateur and as a pro. And and especially in boxing, you'd much rather wrap up early. It's kind of like Bill Belichick's philosophy on how he handles the Patriots. He'd much rather miss on a guy and get rid of him too soon than too late. And I think that's why the Patriots are as good as they are. And that's what you wish for guys like Canelo. And of course, the opposite is always true, it seems like, with boxing. I've been doing some research on Joe Louis lately. And you talk about it, it's almost painful to research Joe Louis's career for many different reasons you may or may not be aware of. But he is definitely a guy who stuck around too long. And when you think about the high-profile Larry Holmes, Muhammad Ali beatdown that signaled the end of Ali's career and presaged his Parkinson's disease, right? Joe Louis went through the same thing, very similar with Rocky Marciano, and I'm sure you know that name, in a very high-profile fight that Joe never should have been in the ring for. And so that's constantly in my mind when I am assessing what's going on in boxing, and for guys like Canelo, who is just, if you haven't watched him fight, if you're watching this, you probably have, but if you haven't watched the fight with Canelo Alvarez, you need to. And the other thing I want to ask Mike about is what's going on with Triple G, because if anybody knows what's happening with this third fight, what's going on with Skipper, what's going on at DAZN in general. I mean, there's a lot of big questions to be asked here, I think, when it comes to